Thank you for the great opportunity to talk in this symposium. Especially thank you, Paul, for getting in the slot of PIT. I want to start off by introducing myself a little bit and how I came into contact with the world of draft animals. And this started on a professional level. I am, for almost 10 years now, the manager of an archaeological open-air museum in southern Germany, which is focusing on the Middle Ages, and therefore, especially in the early Middle Ages, draft cattle use was the main source of power. And so we work with a set of, right now, let me count, 6 draft cattle on site, 4 oxen and 2 cows. And I also have a small scale homestead farm on the site in which I work with draft cattle. And 2, I also do have more professional connections to that field, as I'm currently the president of the International Association of Agricultural Museums, short IMA. And the connection with this also brought me to organizing a World Congress, a digital World Congress on draft animals last year. Some of you attending now attended last year too, so it's a great pleasure to see so many of you again and continuing that journey in the world of draft animals, and especially focusing on future developments. So that's enough about me. Let's now talk a little bit more about the presentation and the topic draft cattle use. I want to take as a case study a project that I developed, or was able to develop a couple of years ago. It is called Via in Lorsch. It is basically a result of a grant or a competition for a grant from the metropolitan area of Rhine-Main, where they wanted innovative new projects that highlight sustainable development and stuff like this. And I came up with an idea of implementing a set of 4 lighthouses in the landscape. I call it always lighthouses. And one of it is the re-implementation of historic land use systems like forest grazing with pigs. For example, the other one was the use of draft cattle in this course, in this case, in forest management, especially on fragile soils. And we have a lot of sand dunes with high quality flora, and we try to reintroduce that use of draft cattle in that case there. Then we have and I will talk about this in particular in the upcoming talk, a educational and research field for animal traction in the 21st century. I will stop there because I will go into more detail later. And we have the so-called field of biodiversity, where we wanted to show not only pesticide-free farming for especially crop production, but also to tell the story of the re-implementation of value-added chains in a community, producing local for the local community. And this is what I'm going to talk about, and especially and all linked to draft cattle use in that case. So when it comes to that field of biodiversity, this started with a field of about 1 hectare in size, where we said, okay, we wanted to showcase the local community, but also local farmers, different possibilities of growing their cash crops and without using any pesticides, and also using heritage varieties, old grain varieties like Emma, Dinkel, meaning spelt, or old heritage varieties of wheat, for example. And we also incorporated the use of draft cattle wherever we could, from basically planting, sowing until harvest. I will talk about that too in more detail. But the more important part was that we didn't want to produce for a global market. We wanted to produce for the local community. And we wanted this to be visible to the public. We wanted the population of that municipality I live in, which is about 15,000 people, but it's right in that metropolitan area, large cities all around, to see how their food is produced. So we also chose the location of that field on a lively street with a bicycle road nearby and a lot of people next to it. We not only work with draft cattle, we also work with local farmers. We paid them to do certain tasks on the field so that they are basically not putting up any risk for what they did for us for that field. And we were able to build up a network of local shops and manufacturers or bakeries that would then, after harvest, sell the products, be it bread, be it the flour. We have a mill in the region we could use for that, and therefore have that value added chain in place. And we started last year with that 1 hectare sized field, and this year we were already at 5 hectares. And when I think about the fact that there was not a single field in the municipality where anyone did not use any pesticides, that is a success already, because now farmers already are giving us their fields to be part of that project. Moving on to that educational and research field of animal traction, this is another field that is directly, at the doorstep of that archaeological open-air museum I have the pleasure to work at, and is also at a very lively bicycle road. And the intention there was and still is that not only we want to transport that often to nostalgia connected theme of animal traction into the 21st century, but also work on the front of developing new equipment. And this is why we, right from the beginning, work together with companies and people like Shafmat Peer, with Paul Schmidt, for example. We invited him for our first field day this March on that research field. We tested some of his equipment. We also did some comparative draft measurements of horses and oxen. In this case, it is already published in a small farmer's journal by now. And what I want to highlight here, and what is very important to me and came up in some of the other papers in the course of yesterday and today too sometimes, is that we also make clear that this is not something from the past. And this often has something to do with the equipment you use. When we started off doing farming outside of the museum limits, and we used old equipment, very well developed, constructed equipment that works perfectly fine, sometimes even better than some of the new equipment. When people approached us, came to the field, they were still caught in that nostalgia or in grandma's and grandpa's times, and told us, well, this is exactly what I'm happy that I don't have to use anymore, this old equipment. And this changed a bit when we presented modern equipment, and when we stepped back one step for the people and showed them shiny new equipment. And they for the first time thought about that this may be something that is something that fits into the 21st century. So we often use that research field also as a conversation starter with the people. And this is for now, at least, a success story. And we used this field for our market gardening operation this year. And this will be another part of my talk in the upcoming minutes. As I already talked about a little bit, everything is connected to that open air museum, which isn't really a museum. We call it Open Air Laboratory. It is dedicated to, educating the public about agriculture in the early Middle Ages, but also the manorial system. It's basically a classical archaeological open air museum. But then again, we do experimental archaeological research and other research projects, which is very much focusing on the fact that we also want to learn from the past for the present and the future. So we do serious scientific research on our fields, having a look at old field systems like the ridge and furrow system, try to understand it, for example, as a risk minimization strategy, to spread risks in the way a field is constructed. We also research a lot in old heritage varieties and see how we can build up populations of our grain that is more resistant against changes. And so this was basically the start of this wider network we're building up in the last couple of years. So coming from the past interpretation of agriculture and transporting it, not with nostalgia in mind, but with the true sense of we want to learn something for the future of it. I do also a lot of teaching at the university level. Also, you can see it down at the bottom right, a couple of students with me on the research field on site, where we did some draft measurements, seeing how that particular reconstruction of a moldboard plow did take up in kilonewton, and how that influences the workforce involved in that special operation. Coming back to our draft cattle per se, as already said, in that the enlarged project, besides the research field where we sometimes also work with horses, we almost solely are depending on draft cattle. And we use two breeds basically there. And the most important breed is the Raytheon Gray cattle. It is a small Swiss mountain breed that is quite small. Makes it well fitting to that medieval context, because they were also quite small, domestic cattle back then. And they're a classical 3-use cattle breed, meaning, and I will come back to that later when it comes to the value of draft cattle in small scale farming, that they were traditionally used when you take the cow of that breed, not only for work purposes, but also for milk, dairy production, and meat production. So you try to get as much out of the animal as possible in a value added chain. And this is why it's also very important for me that we also use draft cows on site to highlight that that interpretation of how we use our heritage livestock. We also have a free marten on the bottom left. You see us, I think it's plowing, yes, with our draft cow team. Free marten is that female twin that from the time it was still in mom's belly did get a little bit male influence from her male twin, and therefore they are usually unfertile and are natural oxen, basically. You don't have to castrate, and we use this one too. Voss cattle also play a rising role. We will get a team of Voss cattle this winter, and I've worked in France with this cattle type quite a lot. This is also me on the bottom right plowing their field, which is dedicated for market gardening the next spring, with a good friend of mine, Philippe Kuhlmann, which is one of the few full-time French farmers solely depending on draft cattle power, and it's a successful company he's doing. So I also work with this Voss cattle on my private small scale farm. So what is very important to us is when we think about also the economy of small scale farming, and I researched small scale farming a little bit in Romania there too, and I see that there are also problems in that system of how to implement draft cattle in the equation, is that you should try to use them year round. the moment you don't use the animal for a couple of months, they cost and they don't bring anything into the company. So what we try to do is that we try to come up with as many tasks as possible for our cattle and to raise the value of them. So starting in spring, we do, of course, the ground preparation with the cattle. What you see at the bottom left here is also us plowing in the cover crop from last fall. Then we of course have weeding in different constellations or different cultures. We also use them for haymaking. I use draft cattle there for my private company, make almost all of my hay with the help of the draft cattle. We also use them for harvesting also of our crops. We use them for transporting of goods, not only of hay, but also just this week we harvested our mangels, fodder beets. We transported them with the wagon back. Then moving on to, well, basically fall. Again, once more, we have plowing, preparations of seed beds, but also some late harvesting, in this case, potatoes, for example. And then whenever we have time and can do so, we use them for logging in the forest. So this is a very important aspect of the work with draft cattle, is that not only if you have a circular system, you can use them year round and you can add value to that different aspects of your work. Another aspect which is important to me, and we most solely talked about draft horses in this symposium so far, is the question of feeding this draft animal. And we don't use any additional feed for our draft cattle of that Radian Gray breed besides hay and fresh grass and straw. So even if they're working hard, that means for us in the high season, 5 to 6 days a week, up to 3 hours a day, but that's the absolute maximum. They don't get any additional feeding but what is growing on their meadow. And we, especially with the oxen, have to be really cautious of feeding them too high quality food because they can get problems on their feet. And therefore, we usually let them have like a portion of that meadow per day on a daily basis. And if they are not working a lot in winter, they even stay strong on that hay and straw. Sometimes it's nerve killing when they eat their straw bedding, but well, it's also food for them. So this is important to me to state, that they're cheap in feeding. When it comes to harnessing our draft cattle, we use the so-called adjustable 3-pad collar, a harnessing system that was developed in Europe in basically the turn of the century, but refined in the 1920s, 30s. And you can, well, compare it to some extent with a horse collar, but with 3 individual pads that you can adjust. They're very well adjustable to the individual animal. Of course, you still need more than one set for the life circle of one animal. What we like with this system is that when you have a light soil and you do most of your work with a single animal, that's easy to maintain, long-living harnessing system for a single animal. So this harness you see in both of these pictures, these 3-pad collars, the oxen, they're almost 15 now, that old team. We use that for 10 years now, that 3-pad collar they're using now. So let's now come to our market gardening and what we do on that research and educational field. As I already said, is that let me take a first step before I move on. once more, and to state that we are also learning, and we learn every year. And I'm not a market gardener by profession, and therefore we do mistakes on a yearly, monthly, hopefully not daily basis, but we try to learn from our mistakes. We try to widen our network. We try to ask the right people. We try to work together with the right companies. Schaffner-Paired is just one example. And to showcase not something that looks like a kid playing in the sand, but also to the outside has a professional appearance. So we try to take this operation seriously. We try to orient it on the fact that this has to be, when we want to promote the draft animal powered system in that research field, then it also has to be economically valuable and viable. So we don't want to showcase something that, if you want to live of it, you can't do so. So this is another important aspect of our work. We, as I already stated, have some original equipment from the 1900s up to the 1960s, but also newly developed equipment like weeders, multi-tools, and cultivators we use. And we also try to especially, this is something we haven't followed up on, but I already talked to Paul in the past that I want to do some adjustments when it comes to haymaking equipment, to once more have the power source draft cattle a little bit more in mind, and also when it comes to the speed of cattle in comparison to horses, when it comes to raking and turning hay, that we try to invest some of our grant money into the development of new equipment that is more specialized on draft cattle use and not on draft animal use per se, which is often only associated with horses. While watching that drone footage on the side, I want to show you some of the products we're producing on that market gardening field. We this is weeding the fodder beets right in spring. It was early May, and we try to produce as much vegetables as possible on an almost year-round basis. So we started off with the first harvest in basically May, and we're still harvesting celery and others in November now, and we had good experiences in this first year. And one thing I want to highlight is that we did start with an experiment when it comes once more to that question of value-added chains, and that is that we had a little market stand right at the field, and we were offering the products right from the field, and this is what we also did on the weekly market, the farmers market in town. And we did not sell our produce, but we offered it for a donation. And this, for many people, was the first time that they started thinking about what the produce is worth to them. And we usually end up to get more for a product than we would usually get when you would just buy it in a store. Some people even would put in money in that box, just seeing us working on the field. A lot of manual labor involved, of course, but also when they see the work of the draft cattle. Although I want to highlight that this is not something you should build a company on, but in our special constellation with that research field, this is a process of new thinking. You can start when you have a lot of people involved, and when you want to make a difference when it comes to value of your food. the first time I had this idea was when people were asking about our free-ranging chicken and the eggs they lay on our private farm operation, and they wanted to know how much the eggs cost. And I always reply that what is the egg worth? You see what they eat, you see them ranging free. What is it worth to you? And some people ended up giving €1 per egg, which is a lot. So we kept using that system for our constellations. Let's move on from that market gardening perspective to some other aspects of our work where we use the draft kettle that is also crop production. As I already said, some of our fields, the smaller fields, and the smaller they get, the more efficient draft animals and draft cattle can be. Some of the fields we completely work with the draft kettle, the complete cultivation and harvesting cycle. Starting with the plowing or cultivating, we do also, this also includes always manual labor. We don't have a sower. We usually do so by hand still. When we have larger fields, especially that fields of biodiversity, sizes of a couple of hectares sometimes, we also, as I already said, work together with local farmers. They also use tractors for the planting, for example, but then we do the weeding with the cattle once more. There is also a short video here on top where you can see the weeder working in that's emmer wheat. We used a single for that, but it turned out to be quite nice. And also that weeder is quite nice for seedbed preparations. This is also something we came in contact with when we talked with Paul Schmidt. When it comes to the harvest, you see that on the right top part, we also use, the same equipment we also use for mowing our hay. And we then transport the harvest usually with our draft cattle to the barn and then do the threshing. This is something we did with an old threshing machine from the 1920s, which was in that case powered by a 1940s German tractor. So not everything 100% is draft animal use, but the cultivation cycle itself to some extent is. This also is something when we tell the story about these products, it plays an important role. This also rises the value of these products. And as I come from the field of public engagement, that museum perspective, I learned a lot that good marketing really can change a lot and really give great value to a product. We saw that in the prior a talk about the asparagus culture as well, because they see, okay, this is something special. This is done with draft animals. Also, people with a little bit more in their pocket when it comes to money are willing to invest something in there too. We also used draft cattle power for our corn operation. We did the sowing by hand with the mechanical sewing machine, and we did the weeding process completely with the draft cattle. I'm not sure. This is a short video of the plot after cultivating it with our draft cattle. Yeah, potato culture on the left-hand side. I will talk about that in a minute. Let's have a look at the timer. It's okay. So corn production is also an aspect of our small-scale farming work. We did this is also popcorn, and we will try to now for the first time sell draft animal powered produced popcorn in the local community. This is the potato production we have. We did the complete cycle with the draft kettle. You see that harvester here, potato harvester there. We used it even with a single, but that was solely possible because it was very light sandy soil. Usually we would have to work with a team to do the work there. we also try to incorporate, you can see to some extent or symbolically on the left picture, to include the community. It's a little bit something caught in between the CSA and a public project, that we invite the public to, well, help on the fields, on special occasions, like picking potato bugs, for example, or helping with the harvest. And there's great interest there. And we, inside the museum constellation that extends to the research field, we also have a set of volunteers in a voluntary ecological year, the year program where they work in our projects and also get trained in the use of draft kettle work. And it is quite nice to see that some of the colleagues end up studying organic farming, and one colleague even then returned and now is the farmer on site and responsible also for the vegetable growing. So let's come to a conclusion. I want to highlight, but that I think suits to some extent also to every other draft animal. The smaller and more complex the operation, the more efficient draft cattle use can become. So the fields we got in the first place, this also came up in other talks of the symposium, just the slots that were too small to do the tractor work, and nobody wanted, in particular, were the ones we could start and still produce a lot of it, especially when it comes to vegetable culture. And what I want to highlight when it comes to specifics of draft cattle use in agricultural and draft market gardening schemes is that draft cattle use is of very low costs. I highlighted the importance of low costs when it comes to feeding, that 3-use scheme I talked about. And so basically, when you think about enclosed cycles, you can even, well, produce your hay or harvest your hay with the cattle, and therefore the animals can work for their own food, to put it a little easy. And then we also, of course, have the manure production where the animal can help you spread the manure in the end. I think, and I already highlighted that public outreach when it comes to work with draft animals per se is very important, and we have to do a lot more in that respect. And this was also an important outcome of that World Draft Animal Congress last year, that we have to become opportunists and to take every opportunity to promote that draft animal use. But, and this is something Paul highlighted a couple of times, we also have to see the scientific aspects behind it. We shouldn't promote something that people still associate as something from the past, which looks nice today, but it has to be something that people can live from. So we always have to very seriously consider what we promote, in what way we promote it, and don't produce so much space for attacking. And I always quote one short story where a colleague of mine, Astrid Masson, she's the responsible farmer at the state domain in Berlin. She works with draft cows in this case, and they work also with tractors in its state domain. And they had a lot of snow that one year in winter, and colleagues kept having that very common smile upon her when she was working with the draft cattle, as playing around. And now that was a day that there was a deep snow, and they couldn't bring the feed for the horses to the state domain with the tractors because they were stuck in the snow. And what did Astrid do? She took the sled and brought the hay with the draft cattle to the horses. And this is the day when they stopped laughing about her. And this is something I think, yes, we need more situations like this to be taken more seriously. And then last, which I always want to be honest when it comes to draft cattle use. Of course, cattle are slower in work speed than horses. And this is something one has to keep in mind and have to do its own equation. if this can be equaled out by the lower costs in feeding, for example, and so on and so forth. So I am now at the end of my little presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.